Let me just say one thing about Doug Ford and his Conservatives, and that is that they are desperate and flailing. And of course, they want you to be talking about me.
That's new Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie, who was at Queen's Park today to meet with caucus members and give her first press conference, as you saw there. Since her win on Saturday, the Progressive Conservatives have been attacking Crombie, criticizing her housing record and painting her as an elite who is out of touch with voters. What will the fight between Premier Doug Ford and Bonnie Crombie look like moving forward? Let's bring back the front bench: Brian Galank, Gary Meyer, Tom Mulcair, and Ajud Al-Malise. Gary, I'll start with you. It's like super personal between them right off the bat. She even indicated today that the Premier has yet to call her to offer congratulations, which would be sort of convention in most provinces. What do you think that tells us about the dynamic in Ontario moving forward?
Well, I guess the honeymoon's over. It didn't last very long. It wasn't measured in weeks. It was measured in perhaps minutes. And, I think that it does yield an interesting outcome in terms of how things will be conducted at Queen's Park. It appears to be very combative. It's starting right off the bat. And, I've met, her worship in Mississauga. For somebody to, come in after, Mayor Hazel is pretty remarkable. And I think she learned a lot of lessons from Mayor Hazel, who was no shrinking violet herself. So Mayor Crombie she's feisty. Doug Ford is feisty. Neither one of them should be discounted as being effective politicians. But I think we can predict that with a reasonable amount of certainty that this is going to be a very tumultuous welcome for Mayor Crombie at the time that she takes her position in the House after perhaps a by-election makes her an MPP again.
What do you make, Tom, of the nature of the characterizations or attacks on Bonnie Crombie so far from the PCs? She's elite. She drives fancy cars. She vacations in the Hamptons. And then you see Bonnie Crombie's camp saying, well, the Premier also only hangs out with developers. Like, who's the bigger elite, basically, is how they're trying to frame each other.
I actually feel that there's an undertaste of misogyny in a lot of those attacks on Bonnie Crombie. She's a heck of a politician. I knew her in Ottawa, and of course, and I got a chance to meet her several times while she was mayor, and I just think she's an outstanding politician. She's also decided that her votes are going to come from Doug Ford's side of the road. The middle of the road is where people win elections in Canada, so she's going to have to decide if she wants to go after more centrist NDP voters as well, if she wants to have a chance of forming a government. Mart Stiles has been very high road since Bonnie Crombie arrived, very smart, playing it much differently from Ford. Ford going white hot on Bonnie Crombie is making her a much more important figure. If he had played it back a little bit, he might have made her work for that sort of attention, but she's enjoying it, obviously, because in politics, it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad. The important thing is that they're talking about you. So she's created a phenomenon already for herself. That'll show up in the first polls, I'm convinced, Vashi. And we're going to be able to see whether she's able to pull it off or she starts to go more center as well, maybe even a bit center left. There was a great candidate who came second, and it was a 53-47 split. It wasn't a cakewalk for Bonnie. And his name is Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. Very strong MP. He took away a riding from the NDP. He's more on the progressive side. And if I were one of her advisors, I say, do everything you can to bring this guy into the tent, because he's going to bring a lot of the more progressive voters with him. I think that would be a good move by her, by the way.
Yeah, it was interesting during the campaign. At one point, Bonnie Crombie, Najud, said, I'm going to govern center-right, and then she basically ended up taking it back. What does the sort of way in which the debate is already framing between the two of them and the personal nature of it say to you?
Well, we know from polling that she appeared to be the strongest candidate against Doug Ford compared to the other candidates in the Ontario Liberal race. And so I'm sure Doug Ford knows that and is probably concerned about that. He's coming off of a scandal with relation to the Greenbelt. She's obviously going after that. And so, he has been able to brush off a lot of problems, a lot of scrutiny, a lot of scandal. But at some point, it could come and bite him. And I think right now he's trying to make sure that he stops Crombie before she succeeds at building any momentum against him. And I think there's a valid point to say that, but also attacking her suggests that you're concerned, and that's going to be obvious to Ontarians.
Does it also suggest, to kind of jump off both what Najud and Tom said, Brian, that there is kind of a race for the center vote in particular? And is that potentially a vulnerability, given how much of the progressive flank that could leave open?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, but I have to say that I think the idea that she comes out of the leadership and is being attacked by the premier already, to everybody's point, really, which I agree with everybody's remarks, it is a demonstration that, yeah, they see her and they see her leading the Liberal Party as probably the biggest threat. And interestingly, like Tom mentioned, I mean, she's, the Liberals are in third place. She doesn't have a seat in the House. I mean, it would be easy for her to be basically forgotten by the media and have a tough time trying to get headlines. So this is a bit of a gift when you look at it from that perspective, for sure. When I became leader of the Liberal Party, I didn't have a seat. It was a long, long time ago. We established that in the last segment here, so this is probably the oldest I felt.
You're old, yeah.
Very, very long time ago. But same thing, the Conservatives started already to attack me. Now, I was either tied or ahead in the polls at the time. That's not the case in Ontario at the moment. So really, you could say maybe this is a mistake for Ford and the Conservatives to sort of go at her the way that they are and kind of so aggressively and so early. But I think what they're saying to themselves is that, yeah, as Nuju points out, she's a threat. We need to define her right away and not give her any space to define herself. And yes, it may look a little bit like we're a bit afraid. It might look a little bit like we're giving her some credit and a little more attention. But that risk is worth it if we're able to define her early on. And then she would not, in their view or hopes, not be able to get out of that box that they framed her in.
Right, sort of what the Liberals didn't do with Poilievre, I guess. But that's a whole other conversation for another time. I have to leave it there. Thank you so much to the front bench, Brian Gallant, Gary Marr, Tom Mulcair, and Najud Maliz. Before we